In the depths of space where starlight barely penetrates the void between galaxies, the Galactic Combat Academy floats like a steel monument to war. Here, the children of 1,000 worlds learn to kill with precision, to command fleets that could glass planets, and to lead armies across the cosmic battlefield. For 3 centuries, this institution has produced the finest warriors the galaxy has ever known. But today, something unprecedented is about to happen in Training Bay 7. Something that will make admirals tremble and cause entire species to reconsider everything they thought they knew about a small, unremarkable planet called Earth. The security footage will be studied for decades. The medical reports will be classified at the highest levels, and the name Marcus Chen will become whispered legend among the halls where legends are born. The galaxy thought it knew humans. They were wrong. When the smoke clears and the emergency lights stop flashing, when the medics finish their grim work and the investigators seal the scene, one truth will emerge from the chaos. Never corner a human, never threaten what they protect, and never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. Marcus Chen had always been invisible. Even here, aboard the most prestigious military academy in known space, surrounded by the children of admirals and war heroes from 100 different worlds, he managed to fade into the background like shadow against steel. The Galactic Combat Academy hung in the void between systems, a massive station that housed over 50,000 cadets from every major species in the Confederation. Its halls echoed with a dozen different languages, its training bays filled with the sounds of combat practice that would make seasoned soldiers weep. This was where the future of galactic warfare was forged, where the sons and daughters of the elite learned to command star fleets and lead planetary invasions. Marcus sat in the back corner of the tactical theory classroom, his datapad balanced on his knees as Professor Vexai, a towering Kitharan with kidness blue skin and 4 arms, gestured dramatically at the holographic battlefield floating above the lecture podium. The Battle of Kepler's Edge played out in miniature, complete with tiny starships exchanging devastating broadsides while fighters swarmed like angry insects. As you can see, Professor Vex's voice resonated through specialized vocal cords that could produce sounds and frequencies most species couldn't even hear. The human fleet's tactics were unconventional. Rather than engaging the Zephyrian Armada in traditional formation, they scattered their forces across 17 different vectors. A ripple of dismissive laughter ran through the classroom. Marcus didn't look up from his notes, but he felt the familiar weight of 100 eyes turning to find him, the only human in the room. He'd grown used to being the representative of his entire species in most classes. Earth was still relatively new to the Confederation, and humans remained something of a curiosity to most other races. "Chaotic," muttered Kraltix, a massive Thraxian whose species had dominated galactic warfare for nearly a millennium. His rocky hide gleamed under the classroom lights, and when he spoke, it sounded like boulders grinding together. Typical human disorder. No discipline, no proper formation. "It's a miracle they won it all." Several other cadets murmured agreement. Marcus continued taking notes, his stylus moving steadily across the datapad screen. He'd heard variations of this conversation countless times over his 3 years at the academy. Humans were chaotic. Humans were unpredictable. Humans were lucky rather than skilled. However, Professor Vexai continued, raising one of his 4 hands for silence, the results speak for themselves. The Zephyrian fleet was not merely defeated, but completely routed. 13 enemy dreadnoughts destroyed, 47 cruisers disabled or captured, and minimal human casualties. The question we must ask ourselves is whether this victory was achieved in spite of human tactics or because of them. The classroom fell silent. This was dangerous territory. The Zephyrian Empire had been considered unbeatable until humanity joined the war effort. Their defeat had sent shockwaves through the galactic political structure that were still being felt today. "Sir, Tyrannos, an elegant Valerian female with silver skin and large dark eyes, raised her hand. Surely you're not suggesting that humans possess some inherent tactical superiority? Their species has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. "I'm suggesting," Professor Vexay replied carefully, "that we may need to reevaluate our understanding of effective combat doctrine. The human approach to warfare appears to favor adaptability over adherence to established principles." More murmurs, these less dismissive and more uncomfortable. Marcus found himself the center of attention again, though he kept his eyes fixed on his notes. He could feel Kralfix's gaze burning into the side of his head like a laser sight. "Adaptability is just a fancy word for desperation," Kralfix rumbled. "When you don't understand proper tactics, you flail around and hope something works. Sometimes you get lucky." This time Marcus looked up, Kraltix was staring directly at him, his four eyes glowing with an internal light that marked him as agitated. The Thraxian was one of the Academy's top students, destined for command of his own battle fleet upon graduation. He was also, Marcus had noticed over the years, particularly vocal about human inadequacy. "Is there something you'd like to add, Cadet Chen?" Professor Vexai asked, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus considered his words carefully. He'd learned early in his academy career that drawing attention to himself rarely ended well. But the challenge in Kraltix's glowing eyes was unmistakable, and backing down would only make the next 3 months until graduation more difficult. "I think," Marcus said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "that calling human tactics desperate might be missing the point. We don't flail around hoping something works. We adapt because the universe is chaotic, and rigid doctrine often fails when faced with unexpected situations." The silence in the room was deafening. Several cadets exchanged glances, clearly surprised that the quiet human had spoken at all, let alone offered what sounded suspiciously like a criticism of traditional military thinking. Kraltix's hide darkened to a deep gray, a sure sign of anger among his species. "Doctrine exists because it works, because it's been tested in countless battles over thousands of years. Your species stumbles into one lucky victory, and suddenly you think you've revolutionized warfare." "I didn't say that," Marcus replied, his voice still quiet but steady. "I just suggested that maybe there's value in being flexible. The Zephyrians had fought the same way for 300 years. They expected us to follow the same patterns everyone else did. When we didn't, they couldn't adapt quickly enough." "Chaos is not a strategy," Kraltix growled, rising from his seat. At full height, he towered over every other student in the room, his massive frame casting shadows across half the classroom. "Discipline wins wars. Order defeats disorder. Your people got lucky once. That doesn't make you warriors." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just academic debate anymore. The entire class was watching now, waiting to see if the quiet human would back down or stand his ground. He could feel Professor Vexai's attention like a weight on his shoulders. "Maybe," Marcus said, finally looking directly at Kraltix, "the difference isn't between chaos and order. Maybe it's between thinking and reacting. Between adapting to what is instead of clinging to what was." The reaction was immediate. Half the class erupted in outraged voices, some supporting Kraltix, others surprisingly coming to Marcus's defense. But the big Thraxian himself was perfectly still, his four eyes locked on Marcus with an intensity that made the air feel electric. "Enough!" Professor Vexai's voice cut through the noise like a vibroblade. "This discussion is moving beyond the scope of today's lesson, however. I believe it highlights an important point about the evolution of military doctrine in response to changing circumstances." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Kraltix, noting the way the Thraxian's hands had curled into fists, the way his breathing had changed, the subtle shift in posture that Marcus had learned to recognize over years of careful observation. He'd made an enemy today, and not just any enemy. Kraltix was connected, influential, and possessed of the kind of pride that made backing down impossible. The rest of the class passed in a blur of strategic analysis and historical examples, but Marcus found his attention drifting to the faces around him. Some showed curiosity about his earlier comments, others displayed the kind of cold calculation that marked them as future military leaders evaluating a potential threat. But it was Kraltix's expression that worried him most. The Thraxian wasn't angry anymore. He was planning. When Professor Vexai finally dismissed the class, Marcus took his time packing his datapad and stylus, hoping to let the crowd thin out before making his way to the door. But Kraltix was waiting for him, flanked by 2 other Thraxian cadets whose names Marcus didn't know, but whose expressions he recognized. Predators who had found prey. "Hey, Chen." Kraltix's voice was deceptively casual as Marcus approached the door. "Walk with me, subligard, not preaching." It wasn't a request. Marcus nodded slightly and fell into step beside the massive alien, acutely aware of the 2 bodyguards flanking them as they moved through the academy's corridors. Other cadets gave them a wide berth, recognizing the tension that surrounded the group like a storm front. "You embarrassed me today," Kraltix said conversationally as they walked. "In front of the entire tactical theory class. In front of Professor Vexai, who will undoubtedly include today's discussion in his report to the Academy Review Board." Marcus said nothing. He'd learned over the years that sometimes silence was the best defense, especially when dealing with beings whose concept of honor required satisfaction for perceived slights. "My family has commanded Thraxian battle fleets for 12 generations, Kraltix continued. "My great-great-grandfather led the charge that broke the Keltharian rebellion. My uncle commands the 7th Fleet. I will not be remembered as the Thraxian who was intellectually defeated by a human. They had reached the residential section of the academy now, where the corridors were narrower and the foot traffic lighter. Marcus noted their location with growing unease. His quarters were in the opposite direction. I don't want to fight you, Marcus said quietly, finally breaking his silence. Kraltix laughed to sound like grinding stone. Fight?
Who said anything about fighting? This is about education, Chen.
About teaching you your place in the natural order of things. They stopped at an intersection of corridors. To the left lay the main thoroughfare leading to the dining halls and recreation areas. To the right, a dimmer passage led to the maintenance sections and storage areas. Kraltix gestured right. This way, he said. I want to show you something. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to walk away, to find a crowded area where witnesses would prevent whatever Kraltix had planned. But the two Thraxian bodyguards had positioned themselves to block the other exits, and their expressions made it clear that refusal wasn't an option. They walked deeper into the maintenance section, past humming machinery and storage compartments filled with academy supplies. The lighting here was dimmer, designed for utility rather than comfort. Finally, Kraltix stopped at a large storage bay marked Combat Training Equipment. He pressed his palm to the access pad, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, racks of practice weapons lined the walls. Blunted swords, training rifles with non-lethal ammunition, protective gear designed for a dozen different species. It was here that cadets came to practice combat techniques outside of formal training sessions. Private study session, Kraltix explained, stepping into the room. Just the four of us. No instructors, no witnesses, no interruptions. You wanted to talk about adaptation? About thinking versus reacting? This seems like the perfect opportunity for a practical demonstration. Marcus entered the room slowly, his mind racing. The door slid shut behind them with a finality that made his stomach clench. He was trapped now, facing three opponents who outweighed him significantly and had the tactical advantage of planning and preparation. Choose your weapon, Kraltix gestured to the racks lining the walls, or weapons if you prefer. After all, humans are supposed to be adaptable, aren't they? The two other Thraxians moved to flank Marcus, cutting off potential escape routes while Kraltix selected a training sword from the nearest rack. The weapon looked tiny in his massive hands, but Marcus knew from experience how much damage even a blunted blade could inflict when wielded with sufficient force. Marcus stood perfectly still for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities. Three opponents, all larger and stronger than him. Limited space to maneuver. No chance of outside intervention. The smart thing to do would be to submit, to accept whatever beating they had planned and hope it wouldn't be severe enough to require medical attention. But something in Kraltix's expression told him that submission wasn't an option. This wasn't about teaching him a lesson. This was about breaking him, about proving human inferiority in a way that couldn't be argued or debated. And if he broke here, if he allowed himself to be crushed, it wouldn't just be his own reputation at stake, it would be humanity's. Slowly, Marcus moved toward the weapon racks. His fingers traced over various options: swords, clubs, staff weapons, projectile trainers. Behind him, he could hear the quiet conversation of his captors, discussing their approach in the Thraxian language. They weren't worried about his weapon choice. They were confident that numbers and size would carry the day. They were probably right, but as Marcus's hand closed around the grip of a training staff, he remembered something Professor Vexai had said earlier. Sometimes adaptation meant abandoning everything you thought you knew about how things should work. He turned to face his opponents, the staff held loosely in his hands. Kraltix smiled, showing teeth designed for tearing metal. Ready for your education, Chen? Marcus didn't answer Kraltix's question. Instead, he closed his eyes and let his breathing slow, feeling the weight of the training staff in his hands. The weapon was designed for species with 4 arms, making it awkward for human grip, but that was fine. He hadn't chosen it for its suitability. The 3 Thraxians spread out in a loose triangle formation, a textbook encirclement pattern that would prevent him from focusing on any single opponent. Kraltix held his position at the front, clearly intending to lead the attack while his companions struck from the flanks. It was solid tactics, the kind taught in every military academy across the galaxy. You know, Kraltix said conversationally as he adjusted his grip on his training sword, I've always wondered what makes humans think they're special. Your planet is unremarkable. Your technology is borrowed from other species. Your military history is nothing but endless wars against your own kind. Marcus opened his eyes but didn't respond. He was watching the micro movements of his opponents, the subtle shifts in weight distribution that preceded action. Years of careful observation had taught him to read body language across species barriers, a survival skill developed during countless encounters with Academy bullies. The Thraxian on his left, whose name patch read Gorthol, was favoring his right foot slightly. An old injury, perhaps, or simply poor balance. The one on his right, Vextor, kept glancing toward the door, suggesting either nervousness or escape planning. But it was Kraltex who concerned him most. The big alien moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Your people conquered their own world through brutality and ignorance, Kraltex continued, beginning to circle slowly to his right. You poisoned your atmosphere, devastated your ecosystems, and nearly drove yourselves extinct before you developed interstellar travel. And now you want us to believe you understand warfare better than species who have been fighting among the stars for millennia? Still, Marcus said nothing. He shifted his grip on the staff, letting it slide through his fingers until he held it near one end rather than at the balance point. The movement looked like nervousness, like a fighter adjusting his weapon because he didn't know what else to do. Kralthix's smile widened. Nothing to say? No brilliant insights about adaptation and flexibility? The Thraxian's voice carried a mocking edge that made his companions chuckle. Perhaps you're finally learning your place. That's when they attacked. Gorthol came from the left, moving with surprising speed for his bulk. His training club raised in a classic overhead strike. Vextor circled right, attempting to get behind Marcus, while Kralthix charged straight ahead, his sword leading in a thrust aimed at Marcus's center mass. For a split second, Marcus was perfectly still. Then he moved. The staff in his hands suddenly became a lever, its long end sweeping down to catch Gorthol's ankle while Marcus pivoted away from Kralthix's charge. Physics did the rest. Gorthul's momentum carried him forward, even as his feet were swept out from under him, sending all 400 pounds of Thraxian crashing into Kralthix's path. The collision was spectacular. Both aliens went down in a tangle of limbs and angry cursing, their weapons skittering across the floor. But Marcus was already moving, reversing his grip on the staff and driving the butt end into Vextor's solar plexus with surgical precision. Thraxian physiology put their primary breathing organs slightly lower than human placement, a detail Marcus had memorized from comparative biology classes. Vextor doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come, his weapon dropping from nerveless fingers. Marcus didn't pause to admire his work. Kralthix was already untangling himself from Gorthol's bulk, roaring in rage as he scrambled for his dropped sword. Marcus kicked the weapon away, sending it sliding across the room, then brought the staff around in a horizontal arc that caught Kralthix across the side of his massive head. The blow would have killed a human, but Thraxian skulls were reinforced with cartilaginous plates that could absorb tremendous impact. Instead of falling unconscious, Kralthix simply staggered, his vision blurring as his inner ear struggled to process the trauma. Marcus stepped back, the staff held ready but not aggressively positioned. He wasn't breathing hard, and his expression remained as calm and detached as it had been in the classroom. But something had changed in the quality of his stillness. Where before he had seemed invisible, now he seemed absent, as if the person who had entered this room had been replaced by something else entirely. "You want to know what makes humans special?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. Gorthol was still struggling to his feet. Vextor was clutching his chest and fighting for air, and Kralthix was swaying like a tree in a strong wind. "We don't fight fair." Gorthol lunged for him, abandoning any pretense of weapon combat in favor of using his massive hands to crush this impudent human. Marcus sidestepped the charge and used the alien's momentum against him, guiding him face first into the wall of weapon racks. The impact sent training swords and practice clubs clattering to the floor in a cascade of metal and composite materials. Vextor had recovered enough to attempt another attack, but his movements were sluggish and predictable. Marcus caught his grasping hand with the staff, twisted it into a joint lock that no species had ever evolved to resist, and applied pressure until something snapped. Vextor's scream echoed off the walls of the storage bay. Kralthix was the only one left standing, though standing was perhaps too generous a description. The big Thraxian was weaving back and forth, his four eyes unable to focus properly. One hand pressed against the side of his head where the staff had connected, his voice thick with confusion and dawning fear. "You're just a human. Just a weak, soft, prey species human." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying Kralthix with the detached interest of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. "That's the thing about humans," he said conversationally. "We spent 300,000 years as prey animals. Do you know what prey animals get really good at? Killing predators." He moved forward with fluid grace, the staff spinning in his hands. Kralthix tried to raise his arms defensively, but his reflexes were still scrambled from the head blow. The staff struck him twice more, precise impacts that targeted nerve clusters and pressure points that existed in every vertebrate species. Kraltix dropped like a fallen tree. Marcus stood in the center of the storage bay, surrounded by 3 unconscious Thraxians and scattered training weapons, breathing as easily as if he'd just finished a pleasant walk. The transformation that had overtaken him in combat was already fading, his expression returning to the mild, unremarkable mask that had served him so well during his years at the academy. He walked over to where Kraltix lay and knelt beside the unconscious alien, checking his pulse and breathing. Satisfied that there was no permanent damage, he moved on to the other 2, performing the same quick medical assessment. All 3 would wake up with significant pain and wounded pride, but they would wake up. Standing, Marcus walked to the storage bay's control panel and accessed the security recording system. Every room in the academy was monitored for safety reasons, and this space would be no exception. He found the relevant files and began to edit them with practiced efficiency, using skills he'd learned in his computer systems classes. The recording now showed 3 Thraxian cadets entering the storage bay alone, engaging in what appeared to be rough horseplay that had gotten out of hand. No mention of Marcus, no evidence that anyone else had been present during their accident. He copied the edited files to the main security database and deleted the originals, covering his tracks with the same methodical precision he'd used in combat. By the time he left the storage bay, Marcus Chen had once again become invisible. He walked through the academy's corridors with the same quiet demeanor that had marked his passage for 3 years, drawing no attention from the cadets and instructors he passed. But something had changed during those few minutes in the storage bay, something that went deeper than the bruises on his knuckles or the adrenaline slowly fading from his system. For 3 years, he had endured the casual dismissal of his species, the constant implications that humans were inferior, lucky rather than skilled, chaotic rather than strategic. He had absorbed the insults and provocations because fighting back would have made his situation worse, because drawing attention would have invited more trouble than he could handle. But Kraltix had made a mistake. He had cornered Marcus, had threatened not just his physical safety but his future, his reputation, and by extension the standing of his entire species within the galactic community. And in doing so, he had awakened something that had been sleeping behind Marcus's quiet exterior, something that remembered what humans really were. Marcus made his way to his quarters in the residential section, a small but comfortable space that he had shared with a rotating series of roommates over the years. Currently, it was occupied only by himself, his last roommate having requested a transfer after claiming that Marcus gave him nightmares. He had never understood that complaint until now. He sealed the door behind him and activated the privacy protocols, then moved to his desk and opened a secure communication channel to Earth. The lag time for interstellar communication meant that real-time conversation was impossible, but he could send a recorded message that would reach its destination within a few hours. Message to Commander Sarah Chen, Earth Defense Command. He spoke to the recording interface. Personal encryption, Alpha 77. Begin recording. He paused for a moment, considering his words carefully. His mother held one of the highest positions in Earth's military hierarchy, and their communications were always monitored by multiple intelligence agencies. What he was about to tell her would require careful phrasing to avoid triggering security protocols. Hello, Mom. I wanted to update you on my situation here at the Academy. I've been thinking about our last conversation, about the importance of representing our people well in the galactic community. I believe I'm beginning to understand what you meant about humans having hidden strengths that others don't recognize. Another pause. In the background, he could hear the familiar hum of the Academy's life support systems, the distant sounds of cadets moving through the corridors, the ordinary noises of institutional life that had become the soundtrack to his existence. I've had some interesting interactions with other species recently, educational experiences that have helped me understand the dynamics of interspecies relations better. I think there may be some misconceptions about human capabilities that need to be addressed, but I'm handling the situation carefully. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the recording interface while he gathered his thoughts. How could he explain what had happened in that storage bay? How could he describe the feeling of something awakening inside him? Something that felt both completely foreign and utterly familiar. I want you to know that I'm safe, and that I'm learning things about myself and our people that I didn't expect to learn. The Academy is a challenging environment, but I think I'm finding my place here. I'll contact you again soon with a more detailed report. He ended the recording and cued it for transmission, then sat back in his chair and stared at the wall of his quarters. On the surface, nothing had changed. He was still Marcus Chen, the quiet human who faded into the background, who avoided confrontation and drew no attention to himself. But underneath that exterior, something was stirring. Over the next few days, word would spread through the Academy about the accident in Storage Bay 7. Three of the Academy's top-ranked cadets, all from one of the galaxy's most respected military species, had somehow managed to injure themselves during what appeared to be a routine training session. The official report would cite equipment malfunction and poor judgment, but the whispered conversations in the dining halls and recreation areas would speculate about other possibilities. Marcus heard all of these conversations, of course. In his invisibility, he was privy to discussions that others might not have shared in his presence, and what he heard both amused and concerned him. Some cadets were beginning to ask questions about human capabilities that had never been asked before. Others were displaying a new wariness around the quiet human who seemed so harmless. But it was the reaction of the instructors that interested him most. Professor Vexai, in particular, seemed to be watching him with new attention during tactical theory classes. The Kitherin's four eyes would track Marcus's movements with the intensity of a scientist studying a particularly fascinating specimen, and his questions had taken on a probing quality that hadn't been there before. "Cadet Chen," the professor said during a lesson on asymmetric warfare tactics, "your species' military history suggests a particular aptitude for irregular combat. Would you care to comment on the effectiveness of such approaches against conventional forces?"
The entire class turned to look at him, waiting for his response.
Marcus could feel the weight of their attention, the curiosity and speculation that had been building since the Storage Bay incident. He could also sense something else, something that hadn't been there before, a careful respect that bordered on wariness. "I think," Marcus said slowly, his voice as quiet and unremarkable as ever, "that irregular tactics work best when your opponent doesn't expect them, when they've become so accustomed to fighting according to established patterns that they can't adapt quickly enough to something different." Professor Vexahide nodded thoughtfully. "An interesting perspective. And would you say that humans have a natural inclination towards such adaptation?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Around the classroom, he could see cadets from a dozen different species hanging on his words, waiting to hear how he would answer. Some faces showed curiosity, others displayed calculation, and a few revealed something that might have been concern. "I think," he said finally, "that humans are very good at becoming what they need to become. We adapt because we have to, because our survival has always depended on being able to change when circumstances require it." The silence that followed his words was profound. In the back of the classroom, he noticed several cadets were taking notes with unusual intensity, and Professor Vexai's expression had taken on the quality of someone who had just heard something far more significant than a simple answer to a classroom question. Class dismissed early that day, and Marcus found himself walking alone through corridors that seemed somehow different than they had been a week earlier. Other cadets still gave him space, but the quality of that space had changed. Where before it had been dismissive, now it carried an edge of uncertainty. Marcus Chen was no longer invisible, but what he had become in place of invisibility was something that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The message from Earth Defense Command arrived 3 days later, encrypted with security protocols that Marcus recognized but had never seen used for personal communications. His mother's voice carried across the light years with crystal clarity, but there was something in her tone that made him sit up straighter in his quarters. "Marcus, your last message was illuminating. I've shared your observations with some colleagues who have particular interest in interspecies dynamics. We've been discussing certain aspects of human integration into the galactic community, and your experiences at the Academy have provided valuable data points for our analysis." She paused, and Marcus could picture her in her office at Defense Command, surrounded by star charts and intelligence reports, weighing each word carefully before speaking. "I want you to know that your situation is not unique. We've been receiving similar reports from humans in various positions throughout Confederation space. It seems that our people are beginning to encounter challenges that require them to demonstrate capabilities that others didn't expect us to possess." Another pause, longer this time. Marcus found himself leaning forward, sensing that his mother was approaching something important. "Your father's archaeological work has uncovered some interesting historical parallels. Species integration patterns suggest that peaceful coexistence often requires a period of adjustment, a demonstration of mutual respect and understanding. I trust that you'll continue to handle your situation with appropriate discretion, but don't hesitate to do what's necessary to maintain the dignity of our people." The message ended there, but Marcus replayed it several times, analyzing each inflection and emphasis. His mother was many things, but subtle wasn't usually one of them. This carefully worded communication suggested that something larger was happening, something that extended far beyond his personal conflicts at the academy. He was still contemplating the implications when his door chimed, indicating a visitor. Marcus hesitated. Few people ever came to his quarters, and unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. But the Academy's security protocols made it impossible to ignore official requests, so he activated the door release. Standing in the corridor was Instructor Talshay, a Valerian combat specialist whose reputation for precision and lethality was legendary throughout the Academy. Her silver skin gleamed under the corridor lighting, and her large dark eyes held an intensity that made most cadets uncomfortable. She was one of the few instructors who had never shown the casual dismissal toward humans that marked so many of her colleagues. "Cadet Chen," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that characterized her species. "May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Talshay moved with the fluid grace that marked all Valerians, her feet making no sound on the floor despite her considerable height. She took a position near the center of his quarters, her posture relaxed but ready, like a dancer preparing for performance. "I've been reviewing the security recordings from Storage Base 7, she said without preamble. "Very interesting footage. 3 experienced Thraxian cadets, all ranked in the top 10% of their class, somehow managing to injure themselves during what should have been routine training." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Accidents happen, Instructor, even to experienced cadets."
Indeed they do.
Talshay's large eyes seemed to see right through him. "However, this particular accident has raised some questions among the faculty. Questions about the nature of the injuries sustained, the pattern of equipment distribution, and the rather convenient malfunction of several recording devices during the relevant time period." Marcus said nothing. He had expected this conversation eventually, though he had hoped it would come from someone less perceptive than Talshay. The Valerian instructor had a reputation for seeing things that others missed, for understanding implications that escaped more linear thinkers. "You're very skilled with computer systems," she continued, walking slowly around his quarters as if inspecting it for security threats. "Your academic record shows exceptional performance in electronic warfare and information systems, the kind of skills that would allow someone to edit security recordings without leaving obvious traces." Still, Marcus remained silent. Any response would either confirm her suspicions or force him to lie outright, and something told him that Talshay would see through any deception he attempted. "However," she said, stopping directly in front of him, "I'm not here in an investigative capacity. I'm here because I believe we need to have a conversation about your future at this academy, and perhaps more importantly, about your future in the galactic community." That was unexpected. Marcus tilted his head slightly, the first sign of reaction he had shown since she entered his quarters. "Over the past week," Talshay continued, "I've noticed some interesting changes in the social dynamics of this institution. Cadets who previously dismissed human capabilities are now asking questions about Earth's military history. Instructors who had written off your species as inexperienced are reviewing historical battle records with new attention to detail, and certain high-ranking Thraxian cadets are displaying a newfound respect for personal space when humans are present." Marcus almost smiled at that last observation. He had noticed the same phenomenon, though he hadn't realized that the instructors were paying attention as well. "What I find most intriguing," Talshay said, settling herself into the chair at his desk with casual ease, "is that these changes all seem to center around one quiet human who has spent 3 years being completely unremarkable. Someone who has consistently performed at exactly the median level in all categories, never excelling enough to draw attention, never failing enough to warrant concern." Now Marcus did react, his eyes narrowing slightly as he realized what she was saying. She had been watching him far longer than he had suspected, tracking patterns that he had thought were invisible. "The median performance of a remarkably gifted individual," she continued, "requires far more skill than the exceptional performance of someone working at their natural limit, especially when that individual is attending an institution specifically designed to challenge the best young minds from across known space." Marcus considered his options. The massive aliens found themselves facing someone who understood their tactics better than they did, who could anticipate their moves and position herself to exploit the weaknesses that their own strength created.
This is Academy Command to all teams in Exercise Zone Alpha, a voice crackled over the communications array.
"Immediate cessation of all combat activities. Return to designated rally points for debriefing." But the voice was wrong somehow, carrying undertones that Marcus's enhanced awareness recognized as artificial. Someone was using electronic countermeasures to simulate Academy communications, trying to end the engagement before it reached its intended conclusion. "Fake transmission," Marcus called to his team. "That's not Academy Command." The realization rippled through all the teams in the area, creating a moment of confused hesitation that Marcus used to devastating effect. He moved through the forest like a predator who had finally stopped pretending to be prey, his plasma rifle finding targets with inhuman accuracy, while his teammates provided supporting fire that turned their small group into an incredibly effective combat unit. But it was when the reserves arrived that the exercise truly transformed into something that would reshape the Academy's understanding of human capabilities. 3 more teams emerged from concealed positions, fresh cadets who had been held in reserve specifically to deal with any group that proved too effective during the initial engagement. Nearly 40 beings representing the best military academies from across known space, all focused on eliminating Team 7. Marcus stood in the center of the forest clearing, surrounded by his teammates, and felt something ancient stir in the depths of his genetic memory. For 300,000 years, his species had survived as prey animals on a planet that had tried every possible method to kill them. Multiple species, multiple objectives, and scoring based on both individual performance and team effectiveness. Marcus nodded. He had seen the announcement in the Academy bulletins. What the bulletins don't mention, Talshay continued, is that this exercise has been specifically designed to test interspecies cooperation under stress. The scenario will push every participant beyond their comfort zone, forcing them to rely on teammates whose capabilities they may have underestimated. She was looking directly at him now, and Marcus could see something in her dark eyes that might have been anticipation. "I expect," she said quietly, "that some participants will discover that their assumptions about certain species were incomplete. And I suspect that by the end of the exercise, the Academy's understanding of human potential will be significantly revised." The door slid closed behind her, leaving Marcus alone with implications that made his previous confrontation with Crawlfix seem simple by comparison. Whatever was coming would be far more complex than a straightforward fight in a storage bay. It would require him not just to defend himself, but to demonstrate what humanity truly represented in the galactic community. Over the next few days, Marcus began to notice other changes in the Academy's atmosphere. Conversations in the dining halls carried undertones of tension that hadn't been there before. Instructors held closed-door meetings that excluded their usual teaching assistants. And several times, he caught groups of cadets watching him with the kind of intensity usually reserved for studying particularly dangerous specimens. But it was a message from his roommate's friend that really confirmed his growing suspicions. Zara Okafor, a human cadet 2 years behind him in the program, found him in the Academy's library during a quiet evening study period. Marcus answered every question with the same calm precision he had demonstrated during combat, explaining tactical decisions that had seemed impossible to outside observers, detailing capabilities that human military doctrine had never officially acknowledged, and describing training methods that Earth's government had classified at levels that most Academy personnel didn't even know existed. By the time it ended, Marcus Chen was no longer a cadet at the Galactic Combat Academy. He was something entirely new, the first official human combat specialist, assigned to a joint task force that would spend the next several years developing new tactical doctrines based on humanity's unique approach to warfare. But, more importantly, he was proof of something that the galaxy had been trying to deny since humanity's first contact with the Confederation. Humans weren't lucky, they weren't chaotic, they weren't inferior beings who had stumbled into interstellar society by accident. They were predators who had learned to hunt among the stars, and they were only just beginning to show the galaxy what that truly meant. The quiet student was gone. In his place stood something that would make admirals tremble and cause entire species to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the nature of warfare itself. And in training facilities across Confederation space, instructors began adding new chapters to their tactical manuals, sections dedicated to a simple truth that Marcus Chen had demonstrated with devastating clarity: never corner a human, never threaten what they protect, and never ever underestimate the quiet ones. "Marcus," she said, settling into the chair across from his study Corel, "I need to talk to you about something strange that's been happening." Marcus looked up from his tactical analysis homework. Zara was one of the few other humans at the Academy, and while they had maintained a nodding acquaintance over the years, they had never been particularly close. Her presence now, especially given the tension in her voice, suggested that whatever she wanted to discuss was significant. "Some of the other human cadets have been receiving messages from home," she continued, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Not regular family communications, but official correspondence from various government agencies and military commands. All of them say essentially the same thing: be ready for changes in the political situation, and don't hesitate to demonstrate human capabilities if challenged." Marcus set down his stylus. "How many humans have received these messages?" All of them, as far as I can tell. Every human cadet at the Academy has gotten some version of the same communication within the past week, which suggests that someone back home knows something is about to happen here. That confirmed what Marcus had already begun to suspect. The field exercise that Talshai had mentioned wasn't just an academic evaluation. It was something much larger, something that had been planned by beings far above the Academy's normal command structure. "There's something else," Zara continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been monitoring communication traffic through the Academy's networks. Nothing classified, just pattern analysis of message volumes and destinations. Over the past month, there has been a significant increase in encrypted communications between the Academy and several major military commands. Thraxian, Zephyrian, Kitharin, and others." Marcus felt pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. "Coordination," he said quietly. "They're planning something that requires cooperation between multiple species militaries. Or," Zara suggested, "they're planning something that requires a unified response to a perceived threat. Either way, I think we humans are about to become the focus of a lot more attention than we've been getting." Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the Academy's star charts that covered one wall of the library. Somewhere out there, decisions were being made that would affect not just his own future, but the future of every human in Confederation space. And based on the messages they had all been receiving, Earth's government expected them to be ready for whatever was coming. The question was whether 3 years of careful invisibility had prepared him for the kind of visibility that seemed to be approaching. Whether the quiet human who had spent so long avoiding attention was ready to become exactly what the galaxy feared humanity might be. Marcus had a feeling he was about to find out. The field exercise began before dawn on a Tuesday that would be remembered in Academy history for all the wrong reasons. Marcus stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the Academy's main hangar bay, surrounded by nearly 300 senior cadets from 47 different species, all waiting for transport to the exercise zone. The scenario briefing had been distributed the night before. A complex multi-objective simulation involving resource control, territorial defense, and civilian evacuation across a variety of terrain types. Mixed species teams would be randomly assigned with scoring based on both individual performance and group cohesion. Standard Academy exercise, except for the presence of observers from every major military command in the Confederation. Marcus had counted them during the initial briefing. Admirals, generals, and fleet commanders from species that rarely cooperated on anything, all gathered to watch a routine training exercise. Whatever was really happening here, it had attracted attention from the highest levels of galactic government. "Cadet Chen," a voice called from behind him. Marcus turned to find Commander Vexnari, the Academy's Director of Combat Training, approaching with a data pad in her multiple hands. The spider-like arachnoid moved with unsettling grace across the hangar deck, her 8 legs carrying her massive frame with surprising quiet. "Sir," Marcus acknowledged, coming to attention. "You've been assigned to Team 7, Vexnari said, her synthesized voice carrying undertones that human ears couldn't fully process. "Mixed composition, challenging objectives. I trust you'll represent your species appropriately." There was something in the way she emphasized those last words that made Marcus study her expression more carefully. Arachnoid faces were difficult for humans to read, but he thought he detected something that might have been anticipation. "Yes, sir," he replied. "I'll do my best." "See that you do," Vexnari said. "The exercise will be monitored more closely than usual. Performance evaluations will be comprehensive." She moved away, leaving Marcus with the distinct impression that he had just been warned about something. But before he could process the implications, a transport announcement echoed through the hangar, calling for Team 7 to report for departure. Marcus found his teammates gathered around Transport Pod 12, a sleek vessel designed for rapid deployment of combat units. As he approached, he got his first look at the beings he would be working with for the next 72 hours. The team leader was Kestar, a Zephyrian whose blue-scaled skin seemed to shift color in the hangar's lighting. The Zephyrians were known for their tactical brilliance and rigid adherence to military protocol, qualities that had made them the backbone of Confederation strategic planning for over 2 centuries. Standing beside him was Thyra Blackstone, one of the few other humans in the senior class. Marcus knew her by reputation as a specialist in heavy weapons and demolitions, someone whose academic performance had been consistently excellent rather than carefully mediocre. Her presence on the team was either coincidence or very deliberate planning. The third member was Veltar, a Kitharin whose 4 arms were already busy checking and rechecking his equipment loadout. His species were renowned engineers and technicians, capable of maintaining complex systems under combat conditions that would overwhelm most other beings. The final team member was perhaps the most surprising. HFY, a Thraxian female whose rock-like features carried the ritual scarring that marked her as coming from one of the warrior clans. She was watching Marcus with an expression that he couldn't quite read, but her posture suggested someone who was prepared for conflict. Interesting team composition, Thyra murmured as they loaded into the transport pod. A Zephyrian strategist, a Kytheran tech specialist, a Thraxian warrior, and two humans with very different skill sets. Either someone has a sense of humor, or this assignment was very carefully planned. Marcus settled into his seat as the transport sealed itself and began the journey to the exercise zone. Through the viewport, he could see other pods launching from the Academy's bays, each carrying their own mixed-species teams to different starting positions across the simulated battlefield. Cadet Chen, Kestar said, his voice carrying the formal cadences that marked Zephyrian military speech. Your personnel file indicates expertise in electronic warfare and information systems. However, recent reports suggest capabilities beyond standard human parameters. Please clarify your actual skill level for mission planning purposes. The question hung in the air between them. Marcus could feel the attention of his teammates, waiting to see how he would respond. This was the moment he had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, the point where his careful camouflage would either hold or crumble entirely. I'm proficient in the areas listed in my file, Marcus said carefully, but I'm also capable of adapting to circumstances that weren't covered in the training manuals. HFY made a sound that might have been amusement. Adaptation, the human specialty. I've heard interesting things about human adaptation recently. There was something in her tone that made Marcus look at her more closely. HFY's facial scarring was more extensive than he had initially realized, marking her as someone who had seen actual combat rather than just training exercises. And her eyes held the kind of wariness that came from encountering something unexpected and dangerous. Have we met before? Marcus asked quietly. Not directly, HFY replied, but I know your cousin. It took Marcus a moment to understand what she meant, but when he did, he felt something cold settle in his stomach. Krultix wasn't his cousin in any literal sense, but Thraxian clan structures often used familiar terms to describe complex relationship networks, which meant that HFY was somehow connected to the three cadets he had encountered in Storage Bay 7. I see, Marcus said. Do you? HFY's voice carried undertones of challenge. Because I'm not sure you understand the implications of what happened in that storage bay, or what it has set in motion. The transport pod shuddered as it entered the exercise zone's atmosphere, beginning its descent toward the landing coordinates. Denial would be pointless now, and Talshai's tone suggested that she wasn't building a case against him so much as evaluating him for something else. But what? Why are you telling me this? He asked finally. Because, Talshai said, I think it's time for you to stop hiding. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A loosening of constraints that he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten they were there. The galaxy is changing, Cadet Chen, Talshay continued. Humanity's integration into the Confederation has created new dynamics, new possibilities, and new tensions. There are those who see your species as a useful addition to the galactic community, and there are others who view you as a potential threat to established power structures. She stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the starfield beyond the Academy's hull. Recent events suggest that the latter group may be planning to address what they see as the human problem before it becomes unmanageable, which means that humans throughout Confederation space may soon find themselves facing challenges that require them to demonstrate exactly what they're capable of. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the environmental controls. What kind of challenges? The kind, Talshay said, turning back to face him, that your parents and the other leaders of Earth's government have been quietly preparing for since the day humanity joined the Confederation. The kind that require individuals who can think beyond conventional parameters, who can adapt to circumstances that no textbook ever covered, and who can protect what matters to them regardless of the odds. She moved to the door, then paused with her hand on the control panel. There's going to be a field exercise next week, a comprehensive combat simulation involving all senior cadets. Through the viewport, Marcus could see a landscape of rolling hills and dense forest, broken by rivers and punctuated by the occasional structure that would serve as an objective point during the simulation. Perhaps Kestar interjected, we should focus on the mission at hand. Personal disputes can be addressed after the exercise is complete. But Marcus was looking at HFY with new understanding. This wasn't coincidence. His assignment to this particular team with this particular Thraxian was part of something much larger than a training exercise. Someone wanted to see what would happen when he was placed in a situation where his carefully maintained invisibility became impossible to sustain. The transport pod touched down in a clearing surrounded by dense woodland, its landing thrusters raising clouds of dust and fallen leaves. As the team disembarked, Veltar immediately began setting up a communications array that would allow them to coordinate with Academy Command and monitor the positions of other teams. Mission briefing confirms 3 primary objectives, Kestar announced, consulting his tactical display. Resource Control Point Alpha, located approximately 8 kilometers northeast of our current position. Civilian Evacuation Zone Beta, 12 kilometers south. And Territorial Defense Point Gamma, 6 kilometers west. Marcus studied the terrain map, noting sightlines, natural barriers, and potential ambush points. Standard tactical analysis, but something felt wrong about the setup. The objectives were positioned in a way that would force teams into contact with each other, creating conflict scenarios that had nothing to do with the stated mission parameters. This isn't a cooperation exercise, Thyra said quietly, evidently reaching the same conclusion. It's a competition. Someone wants to see how different species handle pressure when their interests conflict. Zixai hefted her massive plasma rifle with casual ease. Competition implies that all participants are operating under the same rules. What if some participants have been given different objectives? The question sent a chill through the group. Marcus found himself thinking about the observers he had seen at the briefing, the high-ranking military officials who rarely concerned themselves with academy training exercises. If some teams had been given secret objectives that conflicted with the stated mission parameters, then this simulation could quickly become something much more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Movement to the northeast, Veltar reported, monitoring his sensor array. Team designation unknown, but they're heading directly for Resource Control Point Alpha. Marcus checked his weapon loadout, a standard plasma rifle that had been modified for simulation use. Theoretically, the weapon could not inflict permanent damage, but recent Academy rumors suggested that some training equipment had been upgraded to provide more realistic consequences for poor performance.
Orders, team leader? Marcus asked, looking at Kestar.
The Zephyrian studied his tactical display for a long moment, weighing options with the methodical precision that characterized his species. We advanced toward Objective Alpha, maintaining formation and defensive posture. If we encounter other teams, we attempt negotiation before resorting to combat. It was a reasonable plan, the kind that would score well on standard academy evaluations. But as they began moving through the forest toward their first objective, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that reasonable plans were exactly what someone was hoping to see fail. The forest was dense enough to provide good cover, but it also limited visibility and created dozens of potential ambush points. Marcus found himself taking point, his senses heightened by the growing certainty that they were walking into something much more dangerous than a training exercise. Contact ahead, he whispered into his comm unit, freezing in place behind a cluster of large trees. 2 teams, approximately 50 meters north of Objective Alpha. They appear to be engaged in combat. Through the undergrowth, he could see plasma bursts lighting up the forest as 2 groups of cadets exchanged fire around what appeared to be a resource cache. The intensity of the engagement was far beyond what Academy simulations normally involved, suggesting that the stakes of this exercise were higher than anyone had officially acknowledged. Species identification? Kestar asked quietly. Marcus studied the combatants more closely, noting movement patterns and equipment configurations. One team appears to be primarily Keltharian, the other mostly Draxan, both species known for aggressive tactics and territorial behavior. What he didn't say, but what everyone on the team understood, was that Keltharians and Draxans had a history of violent conflict that predated their membership in the Confederation by several centuries. Putting teams from both species in competition for the same objective was almost guaranteed to result in exactly the kind of incident they were witnessing.
New contact, Veltar reported, his sensors picking up movement from a different direction.
Large group approaching from the west. Mixed species composition, but moving in coordination that suggests significant training. Marcus felt his tactical awareness shift into the heightened state that he had learned to access during moments of genuine danger. Someone was orchestrating a situation designed to push multiple teams into conflict, creating a test scenario that went far beyond the Academy's normal parameters. Team leader, Marcus said quietly, I recommend we withdraw and reassess. This situation is developing beyond the scope of a standard training exercise. But even as he spoke, he could hear movement in the forest behind them. They were being surrounded, herded toward the conflict zone, like prey animals being driven into a kill box. Whatever was happening here, escape was no longer an option. Zix's high-chambered around in her plasma rifle with a sound like breaking stone. It appears, she said, that the time for careful consideration has passed. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar transformation beginning to take hold. The quiet student who had spent 3 years avoiding attention was about to become something that the galaxy wasn't prepared to witness. And this time, there would be no hiding the consequences. The ambush came from 3 directions simultaneously. Marcus had been expecting it, had felt the subtle wrongness in the forest's rhythm that marked the presence of hidden predators. But expecting an attack and being ready for its precise execution were different things entirely. The teams that emerged from the undergrowth moved with coordination that spoke of careful planning and species-specific tactical integration. From the north, a mixed group of Caltharian and Zephyrian cadets advanced in perfect formation, their plasma rifles tracking with mechanical precision as they sought targets among the trees. From the west, Thraxian heavy assault specialists crashed through the underbrush like living tanks, their massive frames shrugging off branches that would have stopped smaller beings. And from the south, a team of Arachnoid and Draxan specialists used their natural stealth capabilities to slip between the shadows, appearing and disappearing like deadly ghosts. "This is not a training exercise," Kestar said, his voice carrying a note of dawning realization that cut through the tactical chatter. "This is an elimination scenario." Marcus was already moving, his consciousness shifting into the state that had served him so well in Storage Bay 7. But this was different. This wasn't 3 bullies in a confined space. This was a coordinated assault by some of the Academy's most capable cadets, each team specifically chosen for capabilities that complemented the others. "Thyra, suppression fire on the northern approach," he called, his voice carrying an authority that none of his teammates had heard from him before. "Beltar, I need sensor data on the southern group's movement patterns. Zixai, can you handle the Thraxian advance?" The questions weren't really questions. They were commands delivered with a kind of calm certainty that marked someone who had moved beyond normal tactical thinking into something approaching combat prescience. And his teammates responded as if they had been waiting for this moment. Thyra's heavy plasma cannon lit up the forest with sustained bursts that forced the northern team to take cover, disrupting their advance and buying precious seconds for repositioning. Beltar's sensors painted targeting data directly onto their tactical displays, revealing hidden positions and movement vectors that would have been impossible to detect with normal observation. And Zix's High met the Thraxian charge with a roar of challenge that echoed through the trees like ancient thunder. But it was Marcus himself who became the focal point of something unprecedented. He moved through the forest like water flowing around obstacles, never quite where enemy fire was directed, always positioned to exploit gaps in their coordination. His plasma rifle spoke with surgical precision, each shot finding the weak points in armor, the gaps in defensive positions, the exact moments when targets became vulnerable. "Impossible," one of the attacking cadets whispered over an open channel, his voice carrying the shock of someone witnessing something that violated everything he thought he knew about combat dynamics. How was one human controlling this entire engagement? Marcus wasn't controlling it. He was becoming it. Every lesson he had learned about interspecies combat, every detail he had absorbed about different tactical doctrines, every observation he had made during 3 years of careful invisibility, was now integrated into a fluid understanding of the battlefield that transcended normal analytical thinking. He knew that Caltharians favored vertical movement and would attempt to gain elevation advantage through the trees. He anticipated that Zephyrians would try to establish crossfire patterns that trapped targets in overlapping fields of fire. He understood that Thraxians would rely on their physical superiority to break through defensive positions, while Arachnoids would attempt to flank and strike from unexpected angles. But more than knowing these things intellectually, he felt them, sensed them in the rhythm of movement and the pattern of weapon discharges, in the way different species breathe when under stress, and the subtle changes in their electromagnetic signatures that preceded tactical decisions. And he used that understanding to become something that none of them were prepared to face. "Northern team is retreating," Thyra reported, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "They're actually withdrawing from superior positions." "Southern group has gone to ground," Beltar added. "They've stopped advancing and appear to be reassessing their approach." Only the Thraxian assault continued, but even that was faltering as Zix's High demonstrated why her clan markings indicated actual combat experience. They had learned to hunt creatures larger than themselves, to fight predators that outweighed them 10 to 1, to work together in ways that transcended individual limitations, and they had learned to become monsters when necessity demanded it. The final engagement lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it ended, 37 Academy cadets required medical attention ranging from severe stunner burns to complete nervous system shock. 6 required emergency psychiatric evaluation after experiencing what their reports described as impossible tactical scenarios that violated established combat doctrine. and every senior military observer present submitted classified reports that used words like unprecedented. Marcus Chen stood in the center of it all, his plasma rifle still smoking from sustained fire. His teammates arrayed around him like the survivors of a battle that had transcended the boundaries of simulation. He was no longer invisible, he was no longer unremarkable, and he was no longer hiding what humanity truly represented in the galactic community. Cadet Chen, Commander Vexnari's synthesized voice carried across the clearing as she approached with a full escort of Academy security personnel. "You will accompany me for immediate debriefing." Marcus nodded, setting down his weapon with careful precision. As he did, he noticed that every being in the clearing was watching him, with expressions ranging from awe to terror, as if they had just witnessed the emergence of something they hadn't known existed. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "I believe there are some things about human capabilities that need to be discussed." The debriefing lasted 18 hours and involved representatives from 12 different military commands, 4 intelligence agencies, and the Confederation Security Council itself.